Hello friends, I am Dr. Shubha Nigam, Associate Professor, Department of English, LD Arts College, Ahmedabad. I welcome all of you to this first episode of paper 303 in the English syllabus of semester 5, where I'm going to talk about Sir Philip Sidney. Friends, I'm sure in your last semesters you have read and you have become educated about very famous ancient Greek and Roman critics like Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Quintilian, Longinus, and a host of others. It will come as a slight shock to all of us that in English literature, this branch of criticism was perhaps one of the last branches to be developed. The reason for this is that in English literature, the language per se, that means the English language, was comparatively, relatively a much later language to be developed. Therefore, with the late development of language, the literature also developed a little late, and hence criticism, the first signs of criticism, in fact, in English literature, can be seen only somewhere in the middle of the 16th century. Unlike the ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Italians, in England, till the time the effects of the Renaissance arrived, we do not find any criticism at all. The first critic worthy of a particular stature was undoubtedly Sir Philip Sidney. Let us not forget, friends, that Sir Philip Sidney was a highly respected poet, he was a highly respected critic, and most importantly, he was the first, almost the first, national hero that England had. Let us not forget that Sir Philip Sidney, as he lay wounded and bleeding on the battlefield, suddenly saw another soldier also bleeding and very badly wounded, almost breathing his last, but a soldier who desperately wanted some water. Sir Philip Sidney himself was dying, and yet whatever water he had, he offered to that soldier, and he uttered the very famous words, "Thy need is greater than mine." So Sir Philip Sidney was not only respected as a poet and as a critic, but also he was highly revered, highly respected as a human being. He died at a young age in 1586, but the service that he has given to English language, English literature, and of course English criticism stands out. It was outstanding. He is the first known English critic. At the very outset, friends, I would also like to share with you that English criticism, in fact criticism per se, is very often perceived to be a little difficult to understand, perhaps even a little boring. In my first episode on Philip Sidney, I will try my best to simplify his criticism as much as possible. So let's see. Let us come, friends, to the very first slide on your screens. There you see a very handsome looking young man, Sir Philip Sidney. Now on your screen, this is something extremely important, friends. No critical work of a serious nature was produced in England, that is in English literature, till the middle of the 16th century. It was only after the Renaissance, when the Greek and Latin treatises on criticism became available to English scholars, that they began to apply their minds to this department of literature. So friends, let us not forget that it was only after the Renaissance when the Greek and Latin treatises, if you want to know the meaning of treatises, it means great scholarly works. critics. So it was only after the Renaissance when the Greek and Latin treatises on criticism became available to English scholars that they began to apply their minds to this department of literature. The last point on your slide, friends, is extremely important. However, the English scholars did not have any English critics as models. I will just try to explain this point a little, friends. As I just began my lecture, as I said at that point also, I'm just trying to underline this fact again, that the Romans, the Greeks, the Italians and the Spanish, they had models to fall back on. But English critics, or rather English scholars, did not have any English critic whom they could take on as a model. This was perhaps one of the biggest difficulties that this branch of literature was looking at: absence of models. So then let us see, with the arrival of Sir Philip Sidney, how things began to change. Let us not forget, friends, that till the middle of the 16th century, we do not have a single English critic. Let's go back to the slide then. Hence, they were constantly facing the dilemma of following the Greek, Roman, Italian and French critics, that is, the classicists on the one hand, and advocating to maintain the purity of the native English language from foreign influences on the other hand. Friends, please pay attention to this point. It may appear to be a little complicated, but I'll try to simplify. Hence, they were constantly, they means the English scholars, they were constantly facing the dilemma of following the Greek, Roman, Italian and French critics, whom we will put in the category of the classicists, and at the same time they were advocating means insisting, suggesting, to maintain the purity of the native English language. That means English language and literature should continue to have its own charm, its own beauty, and its own appeal. Now this was a dilemma which the English scholars were definitely trying to perceive. They were facing this problem. I'll just try to explain this point a little more clearly. Friends, English scholars they were caught between these two things. On the one hand, they only have Greek, Roman, Italian models and critics. On the other hand, A, they neither have English critics as models. B, they also have this very important task of upholding the beauty and the charm of the English language. So they are caught on the crossroads of the two worlds. So in this scenario, what do the critics do? Let us go back to the slide once again. Look at the last point on the slide now, friends. In 1579, a literary circle, the Areopagus, was formed. Friends, I will just try to explain what is the Areopagus. Areopagus was actually a very tall hill, in fact the tallest hillock in Athens in Greece, on which was situated their court. So because the court is at the top of the democratic system, and because it was geographically also located at the top of a hillock, it was known as Areopagus, at the top, at the height. Now that this literary circle formed in 1579 was therefore also given the name Areopagus. So let us go back to the slide, friends. In 1579, a literary circle, the Areopagus, was formed. What happened in this literary circle? Let's see. This group, now friends, the first point on your slide is extremely important. Please read it carefully. This group aimed at the reform of the English verse by substituting the Greek and Latin system of prosody for the English. Well-known poets like Philip Sidney, Gabriel Harvey, Edward Spencer, Edward Dyer, and others were part of this group. Please pay attention, friends. What is the first point trying to say? That these poets belonging to the Areopagus tried to reform English poetry by substituting the Greek and Latin system of prosody. Look at the second point and then I will explain it a little further. These poets advocated the implementation of the classical system of versification based on the exact quantity of syllables, whereas the English poetry was largely based on accent. I'll read it out again slowly, please understand. These poets, the poets that belonged to the Areopagus literary circle, advocated, that means insisted, suggested the implementation of the classical system of versification based on the exact quantity of syllables, whereas English poetry was largely based on accent. Friends, I will just try to explain this part to you. What is happening to the English scholars? As we just discussed, they are divided between these two worlds. Follow the classicists, uphold the greatness, the charm of the English poetry as well. Now, classical poetry of the Greeks, the Romans, Italians and Latin poets was based on the exact number of syllables. Friends, what is a syllable? Syllable is a sound produced by a vowel. It is, in other words, a vowel sound. For example, the word dog, D-O-G. What is the, don't pay attention to the vowel letter, pay attention to the vowel sound. In the word D-O-G, dog, where is the vowel sound? O. How many vowel sounds do you find in the word dog? Just one. Alright. Now the classical poetry written by Greeks and Romans insisted on having exact number of syllables. That means if the first line of the stanza of a poem has 10 syllables, the second line also should have 10. The third should also have 10. This was what the Romans, Greeks, Latin poets were writing poetry. This is how they were writing. Coming to English poetry never paid attention to having exact number of syllables. In English poetry, you could have the first line of a stanza with 10 syllables, the second line could have 4, the third line could have 6 syllables. There was absolutely no problem whatsoever. Then what was the English poetry paying attention to? It was paying attention to accent, to rhyme. You should have a rhyme scheme, A-B-A-B, A-B-C, A-B-C, A-A-B-B, C-C, D-D, something of that sort. English poetry was insisting on having a uniformity in the rhyme structure, whereas the classicists insisted on having exact number of syllables in every line of their poem. I hope, friends, I have been able to explain this a little clearly. Let's go back to the next slide. So now I hope on your screen the meanings of both the points is very clear. Alright, these poets, I'm reading out the second point again, these poets advocated the implementation of the classical system of versification based on the exact quantity of syllables, whereas English poetry was largely based on accent. Let us go back, let us go to, in fact not back, but to the next slide. Now this, friends, is a very important slide. However, in 1579 in England, another major controversy also began to raise its head, the attack on poetry. Friends, I think I will just like to explain this a little clearly to you. In 1579, as we have just noted, there was this problem between following the classicists and upholding the English way of writing poetry. But then, now there is another bigger problem being faced by the English scholars. there is an outrage, a protest against poetry as a whole. Poetry is being considered as useless and worthless. How? Let us go back to the slide and let us have a look. To come to the second point, this was the Elizabethan age in England, and a lot of economic and commercial progress was witnessed. Hence, poetry began to be labeled by many as worthless, useless. Friends, let us not forget that in any geographical region, when commercialization, commerce and trade begin to increase, money power begins to increase. And when money power begins to increase, art in any form, whether it is poetry, music, painting, in any form, art begins to take a back seat. So the second point of the slide in front of you is making this very clear that this was the Elizabethan age. Lot of economic and commercial progress was witnessed. Hence, poetry began to be labeled by many as worthless. So, if poetry in itself is becoming worthless, then the entire question of following the classicists or upholding the English system itself does not arise. In such a scenario comes a visionary great man, Sir Philip Sidney. So let us go back to the next slide and let us see in this kind of a scenario what is Sir Philip Sidney trying to tell us. Let's go to this slide. The chief critic who led this attack on poetry was Stephen Gosson. Friends, please listen to me carefully. Stephen Gosson. Gosson wrote The School of Abuse, in which he attacked poetry. School of Abuse, friends, it is an interesting fact, a detail to remember that Gosson, when he wrote The School of Abuse, he dedicated this book to Sir Philip Sidney. But come to the second point on your slide. It was in order to defend poetry against the attack by Gosson that Sir Philip Sidney wrote the Apology for Poetry. Please remember this name, friends, clearly. Apology for Poetry is the most important critical treatise ever written in English literature. But then come to the last point on your slide. Sir Philip Sidney had three major tasks on hand. I'll just try to explain this. When Sir Philip Sidney was trying to write Apology for Poetry, there are three important things that he has to do. What are these three important things? Let us come back to the slide and look at them. Number one, defend poetry against all attacks. Number two, advocate the following of and imitation of the classicists. Number three, retain the charm and purity of the native English language. So these are the three major tasks that Sir Philip Sidney had on his mind when he wrote Apology for Poetry. I'm repeating again. Number one, defend poetry against all attacks. Number two, advocate the following of and imitation of the classicists. And number three, retain the charm and purity of the native English language. So friends, this is what Sir Philip Sidney tried to do in his most important work, Apology for Poetry. I think we will put an end to the first episode on our discussion of Sir Philip Sidney. In the second episode, how he defends and how he advocates the classicists and also insists on retaining the originality, the charm, the purity of the English language, how Sir Philip Sidney balances between all of this. This is what, friends, we will see in the next episode. Thank you very much.